So welcome everyone. I call this meeting to order and the roll call has been taken by the clerk. I'd like to remind everyone of the rules of procedure. This meeting is held in a hybrid format in accordance with the electronic participation policy for virtual meetings. The full corporate policy 50 regarding electronic and virtual meetings is available online to review. Staff and delegates participating virtually are reminded to keep their video and microphones off until requested by the chair or members of the committee. All cameras for virtual committee members shall remain on in order to assure quorum. Members of the committee shall wish they indicate to speak by physically raising their hand. For members who are present in person, they will be given the first opportunity to speak, followed by virtual participants. All members of the committee will vote by a physical show of hands. Please leave your hand raised until the chair has determined the result of the vote. In the event of a connection or service interruption that affects quorum, we may recess the meeting for up to 15 minutes to regain quorum. If quorum is not achieved, the meeting will be adjourned. All rules for delegations under the city's procedural bylaw will continue to apply. So moving on to item two is declarations of conflicts of interest. Are there any conflicts of interest for any members of the committee this evening? Please go ahead.
I have a conflict of interest with item 4.2.
Okay, and the nature of that conflict?
I sit on the volunteer board of the Brantford Historical Society.
Perfect. I will also be declaring a conflict with item 4.2 as I am employed by the Brantford Historical Society. And I will also be declaring a conflict on items 4.1 and 4.5 as I did consulting work as part of my work for those items. Any other committee members need to declare a conflict on any item? Perfect. So hearing none, there are no presentations and delegations, so we will move on to those items for consideration. And with the committee's indulgence, I will ask that we deal with item 4.2 first, which is the one where we have two conflicts. And then we will go back and deal with item 4.1 and 4.5, which are the other items that I have a conflict with. And then we will go back and I will come back in and then I will chair the remainder of the items. So 4.3, 4.4, and 4.6 onwards. Does anyone have any issues with that? Seeing none. We'll move on to that item 4.2. So those of us that have conflicts will vacate the room momentarily. Thank you.
So because both Nathan and Lisa have conflicts, they are our chair and vice chair. We're going to ask Councillor Sullivan to chair this portion of the meeting. Chapter 26 does not generally permit councillors to chair meetings, so just looking to ensure there's no objections to Councillor Sullivan chairing this portion of the meeting. Seeing no objection, Councillor Sullivan, you have the roadmap there. Go ahead.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, get right into it. Item 4.2, recommendation to add 53 Charlotte Street, the Crystal Cottage, to the Brantford Heritage Register as a listed property, 2023-423. I will ask Alan Waterfield, Manager of Long Range Planning, to come forward to speak to the item. As a reminder, you have 10 minutes to present, inclusive of questions.
Through the chair to the committee. Yes, my name is Alan Waterfield, Manager of Long Range Planning. I'm presenting on report 2023-423, which is regarding staff's recommendation to add 53 Charlotte Street to the Brantford Heritage Register as a listed property. So 53 Charlotte Street is the new home of the Crystal Cottage. Next slide, please. As the committee is most likely aware, the Crystal Cottage was relocated in November of 2021 from 35 Chatham Street to 53 Charlotte Street. The move was to enable the redevelopment of the Chatham Street property along with adjacent properties at 120 to 138 Market Street for a proposed mixed-use residential development project by Market Street Developments, Inc., while also managing to conserve the Crystal Cottage at a new site that's owned by the Brant Historical Society. That's adjacent to the Brant Museum and Archives at 57 Charlotte Street. So the original site at 35 Chatham Street was designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act under Bylaw 6-85, so back in 1985, on architectural grounds. The designating bylaw made note of the features of the front facade of the building. So City Council approved the relocation as well as the necessary agreements that would outline the conditions and processes to facilitate that move. And it's important to note here that the designation bylaw is registered to the property at 35 Chatham Street, so it itself did not transfer with the move. Next slide, please. So for that reason, the Crystal Cottage at its new location is not currently designated, but it is subject to a heritage easement agreement between the city and Market Street Developments. That was part of the conditions of the move that was intended to ensure that the building would be restored to its pre-move condition, repairing any damage that occurred during that move. And then this agreement is registered to the redevelopment site on Market Street, binding to that property's current or future owners. And it also includes securities that are held by the city, which are funds that the city would be able to draw from to complete the work if necessary. So the Brant Historical Society, they were responsible for preparing the receiving site at 53 Charlotte Street. So that included the foundation that the structure was placed upon, as well as grading and landscaping and connection to municipal services. And those are all set out in a approved site plan agreement. So when approving the move, Council also directed that the Crystal Cottage would be at some point in the future redesignated, again under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, at the 53 Charlotte Street property. Again, that was to occur after the relocation had been completed and the conditions and permits that were related to the move and the site plan had been closed and were completed. Next slide, please. So the intent of waiting to designate until after that work was completed was to ensure that when we do come forward with a new designation bylaw, we could most accurately tailor it to reflect the current or condition of the Crystal Cottage once the repair and the site works have been completed. We did consider, should we designate it sooner? But the designation process under the Ontario Heritage Act includes a notice of intent to designate. And once that notice is issued, then all active permits open on the property would be voided. So that's something we wanted to avoid, since there are open permits on the property and work still ongoing, albeit not as quickly as we may hope, but to bring this project to a close where we can then come forward with a proper designation of the site. So we are recommending that we would list this property on the Heritage Register, to still recognize, it does have the heritage easement on it, but this would just provide an additional recognition of the structure's heritage and design pending the future designation. And it's also important to note that listing the property won't impede any of the restoration work or permits that are continuing. Next slide, please. So there is rationale to list 53 Charlotte on the register, and for Council to support the future recommendation that we'll take to them to do so at a future committee of the whole for planning and administration So as part of that process, the listing process, the Ontario Heritage Act requires council to consult with their municipal heritage committee prior to listing a property. So that's why we've brought this forward to you and welcome your comments on the listing before you, and we can relay those to council in our future report. The Crystal Cottage does still meet at least one of the criteria for determining cultural heritage value and interest under the Ontario regulations, under the Ontario Heritage Act. So it does still have some design and physical value because it's a unique example of a Brantford heritage, or Brantford cottage rather. And it does have those unique design features present in a current state, but they are still there. The glass bottles and the courses of red brick that are all outlined in the designation bylaw that applied to the old property. And then again, we just feel that listing the property will just provide an additional level of assurance that the cottage will be protected in addition to the heritage easement while the remaining restoration and repair and site works continue. We also consulted with the property owner, being the Brant Historical Society, and they supported this initiative to list the property at 53 Charlotte Street on the Heritage Register. So there's no concern from their end. So with that, to conclude, just to the next slide, please. The recommendation before you is to receive the staff report and then please provide us with any comments that you wish. We would forward to council with our recommendation to list the Crystal Cottage on the Heritage Register. That concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you, Alan. Well, we got about 4 minutes. Do we have any questions?
I just have one little one.
Go
So,
ahead.
the heritage destination on the Chatham Street property then has been removed, like when they moved the house, that was null and voided.
Well, I think technically that bylaw is still in place. When we bring forward a new one to designate 53, we can
Declare
repeal
that one removed. Okay,
You know,
that would be my only comment. Everything else is pretty straightforward.
Dan?
So a listed property, a demolition permit comes in, how many days do we have? Jump all over that,
It 60 days.
60 days for listed and 90 days for a designated. So I don't know what the status is of the Crystal Cottage is right now, if it's still up for sale, if it's been sold. I do know the condition of the cottage, and I do know a number of people that were interested in it that would love to buy it for what it's worth and to tear it down and build something new. Being listed, are we just asking for problems rather than jumping right into the designation, current permits involved or not, to protect the building?
Yeah, we've considered that. Again, we've consulted with the Brant Historical Society. They have no intention to be moving forward with the demolition. That being said, we thought, you know, this is just that kind of extra layer of protection. Were that to change in the future, this would give us an opportunity to then go ahead and issue that notice of intent to designate within that 60-day time frame.
As long as we were able to do
We're
that.
not anticipating to have to do that, but again, we just thought this will.
I just know the demolition process is normally putting out fires as they come in, and
You know, anyone looking to, you know, either purchase the Market Street property or the receiving site at Charlotte Street, you know, through their due diligence should be aware of the easement in place and the site plan agreement and whatnot. But, you know, it's just another thing that they can look up and see that it's already not designated.
Anyone else? Go ahead.
I'm wondering what permits are currently open on the work that's being done. And who would oversee the quality of any work to be completed?
There's been some partial inspections on some of the work that's been done, such as the foundation and the retaining wall that leads to the new entrance to the basement into the building at the rear.
And that would be city staff.
So city staff are out inspecting that work. I think, for example, the municipal service connections need to be made. I think that's partially been done from the street into the building, but then there's some additional work that is yet to be done. So it's kind of still work in progress, but yeah, there's that. There's it's been partially graded, but not completely graded, and ultimately landscaping to be done as part of the work that the Historical Society is responsible for.
Okay.
That being said, it may not make sense for them to complete all of their tasks until some of the responsibilities of the Market Street developments
And
tied to the heritage easement are addressed.
okay, and do we know, is the building currently stable, that there's no water infiltration and
One of
potential other?
one of the conditions of the move is that an engineer's report confirming the structural stability of the structure after the move was, sound, and those concerns have been addressed. So apparently that report has been completed. Staff's requested it, but we haven't received it yet today.
Okay. And would that be forthcoming to the committee after it has been completed and submitted?
We can provide you an update on that.
I think that would be,
We requested it before too.
okay.
All right, we have a mover and second to put this on the floor to discuss. Moved by Tamara, seconded by Dan. Now, is there any discussion points? Ooh, quiet room.
I would think that just that the recommendation that it actually be registered at the earliest possible moment
I agree.
upon completion of the outstanding permits. Be advised.
All right, well, if that's all, well, Dan's got something.
Oh, I
Had to come up with something.
After she asked about the condition of the roof, last time I was in there, there was a tarp on the roof. It wasn't, it's not, I don't think they're not protecting it as well as they should be protecting it. If we're gonna list it and it's gonna be in our group of listed or designated properties, I'm hoping that more damage is not done to the building after the move because of that. That I'm hoping that all the permits are new stuff, like the foundation, the retaining wall, all that kind of stuff. That's all new stuff. It's all the old stuff that, like the slate roof,
Recent.
that's the tarp on the roof, just stuff like that. I think that we need to make sure it's protected. And I would like somebody to go out and make sure that it's being protected.
We have a certain heritage listed property on West Street that we're all aware of.
Oh, yes.
That was not taken care of, and
Right.
now they're trying to knock it down because it wasn't taken care of, so we want to make sure that's avoided
Right.
this time.
So rather than demolition by neglect, I'd rather it be.
Agreed. All right, well, with that, call the vote. All those in, oh, wait a minute,
Just, I just like to confirm comments before we proceed.
go, Lisa.
Supports listing on the register and requests that the property be designated at the earliest time possible. Any other comments looking to? Be
I would
included?
say at the completion of the renovations. So then we're actually putting a timeline to it. As soon as their renovations are completed, then we designate it.
Or
So we don't run into any snags.
The close of existing permits, will they be requiring additional permits for any future work? They said mention. I just don't want to mess with the permits they have right now, right?
Yeah,
But
that's my
any
thought.
future permits would think that they shouldn't be issued until,
Sorry.
right? Yeah.
Right now, it's not listed, right now, it's not designated.
Right.
Somebody's restoring it, they don't have to restore it to the original, the way it was, because it's not listed, it's not designated. Even though that we're saying that we're gonna list it, doesn't mean that they have to use the same paint palette, they don't have to use the same windows or whatever.
It is subject to the heritage easement agreement, and through that agreement,
To put it back,
to
Okay, good.
restore it to its previous condition.
So
With
we'll-
that safety net, then yeah.
Those two comments then?
Yeah.
Any other comments?
Alrighty, all those in favor? Motion carried. I will now turn the chair back to Lise.
Wanna-
You're up.
So this is item 4.1, correct? So I will ask Carla Parslow, consultant, to come forward regarding item 4.1. As a reminder, you have 10 minutes to present inclusive of questions.
Carla, there'll be a prompt on your screen. You can accept that prompt and move into the panelist section. And I'll just get the slides pulled up in a moment here.
Thank you. Do you want me to share my screen as well too, please? Or do you want me to? Oh, good. Thank you. Right. Through the chair to the committee, thank you very much. Parslow Heritage Consultancy was retained by 282 Stanley MD Developments, Inc. to prepare a heritage impact assessment for the property at 282 Stanley Street, Brantford, Ontario. This HIA was prepared in support of a development application in advance of redevelopment of the eastern port portion of the property. This HIA has been prepared at the request of the City of Brantford's Planning Department and is designed to meet the scope of work stipulated in the City of Brantford's official plan. The subject property is not currently on the City of Brantford's Heritage Register. Based on current provincial legislation under the Ontario Heritage Act, properties cannot be added to the Municipal Heritage Register once a prescribed event as defined by the Planning Act occurs. Next slide, please. However, there are two adjacent structures, 249 Stanley Street and 365 Rawdon Street, that have been identified as potential properties of heritage value in 2020 by ASI. The proposed redevelopment will not result in any direct physical impacts to the properties or structures located on 249 Stanley Street and 365 Rawdon Street. The proposed development will result in indirect impacts to existing views from these structures, none of which were identified to be significant. In terms of the adjacent heritage resources, 365 Rawdon Street would be separated from the development by a planned city park, and 249 Stanley Street is located at a proposed intersection and entrance to the development, and if anything would be featured as part of this redevelopment. Next slide, please. Given that that we are limited to what we can make for recommendations to adjacent listed properties, we are recommending that a vibration assessment be undertaken prior to the commencement of construction so that a zone of influence can be established. Once established, then it can be maintained and checked throughout the course of construction and development. Our second recommendation is to maintain the current design plan to construct an intersection and entrance to the development that would result in 249 Stanley Street being a corner lot at this intersection, allowing it to be a noticeable feature, maintaining the current design plan of 365 Rawdon Street would be adjacent to the planned park. Furthermore, while the property cannot be listed or designated, we did make recommendations of the Arrowdale Golf Course lands to be incorporated into the development. Some of these proposed commemorations could include anything such as an art installation, sculptures, or an entrance feature reflecting the past use of the property. So something along the lines of stylized artwork commemorating past uses of the property, such as golfing or tobogganing. Stylized artwork commemorating the former two-story yellow brick four-square house with Italianate influence that was located on the subject property that has now been demolished. As well, an information installation detailing the past uses of the property would be a form of commemoration. This installation could take the form of a plaque, and provincial information could include a date range of the golf course use, names of locally or regionally famous golfers who frequented the course, other uses of the property such as tobogganing and festivals, and the importance of the property to the local community. Other forms of commemoration could include things like stylized waste receptacles, inclusion in planned green space of stylized sandbox that mimic a sand trap per se, naming of streets and parks to commemorate the use of the property, and the use of QR codes whereby smartphones could be used to overlay historic images of the area, images that would align with the remaining landmarks to depict the area. So any of these proposed commemorations would require that they be discussed with the city staff and city heritage committee prior to submission. So this is our recommendations for the property, and I'm finished my discussion.
Are there any questions of the applicant?
What's the vibration assessment?
What is a vibration assessment? What it does is, first of all, a vibration assessment will talk, what it does is it first looks at the zone of influence, which means that it's like how many meters from the subject property will the vibrations be occurring? In other words, will the construction be occurring? And what it does is it shows that like within a certain distance, the vibrations are at a certain level. And it shows what the different zones are. So the closer you get to construction, obviously, the greater the vibration. And so what the vibration monitoring would do is first we'd get these zones of influence, and then they can be measured throughout the course of construction to ensure that that there will be no damage to either the structure on Stanley or Rawdon. And essentially, you can look at the zone of influences in the beginning to find out what the potential is for any kind of damage to the structure through vibration. And I suspect for these two properties, there will be some need to monitor the zone of vibration. However, I don't think that there will be any need to mitigate vibrations through scaffolding of the properties or anything like that. I feel that the properties are probably fairly stable and will withhold vibrations, but vibration monitoring is a safeguard.
So will the foundations of the properties be inspected before?
Yes, usually there's an inspection before. That's when the zone of influence will come into. They're just photo documented for inspection, so it's not like there's a complete engineering report. However, usually some kind of structural report will be part of the vibration study and monitoring.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions of the applicant? Councillor Sullivan?
How frequent will these assessments be taking place to monitor? facility?
Good question.
Are they gonna be daily, weekly?
No, they probably won't be daily. And I'm not even 100% sure if they'll be weekly. What usually happens is when the construction is set up, there will be an environmental coordinator on the construction site who will be in charge of all of the environmental monitoring for the development. And so the vibration monitoring will be part of that. And unfortunately, I'm not a vibration specialist. Usually, I think that the vibration specialist would make the recommendation for how often it should be monitored. My thoughts are, though, it probably would not be like every day. We could be looking at weekly or bi-weekly or even monthly.
Is there any other questions, anyone for the applicant? Seeing no other questions, may I please have a mover and a seconder for the motion? Councillor Sullivan is moving it. And
Right beside you.
that was first. And Beverly, seconder. All right. Any discussion or any comments the committee would like to forward to staff regarding this item? All right. Seeing none,
Actually, I think I would like to see the assessments done at minimum weekly. A lot can happen in a week, a lot more can happen in 2.
Stan?
I haven't been following the whole project. Is it like a very tall building or is it just houses going in?
6-7 stories.
Oh, it's just, okay, it's not like a 20-story.
No, it's all like proposed mixed. Sorry,
Yeah.
Alan.
It's not a tower.
No.
You know, the assessment's gonna take into account what they're actually building.
Yeah.
I believe the applications that are in are for townhouse oriented, so maybe up to 4 stories, but it's not a tower that, you know, would have more significant pilings to bedrock to support tall structures. Again, they will assess that.
Yeah, I was just gonna make a comment, like, this is probably the most comprehensive study and demonstration I think we've seen coming out of one of these, so I do appreciate the amount of information that was in there, and yeah, I would like to see something commemorating Arrowdale as well. Like, I like the idea that they're planning on doing some artwork features or, you know, signage, just to keep the spirit alive down there, but yeah, and the sunshine studies are all in there too. I'll go through, yeah. Kind of very thorough.
All right. That's first time speakers. Is there any? What's the second one? First one? Okay. If I can, as chair, I would just say I actually thought, yeah, it's very comprehensive. It's very thorough. I appreciate that, as well as the recommendation for commemoration of the former Arrowdale lands. I think is significant, and I'd love to see our city do something like that. And so all those in favor of the comments?
Madam Chair, if I may.
Pardon me?
Yes, if I may, I just like to again confirm comments. The committee supports the recommendations from the consultant, including the commemorative work and vibration assessments, and then recommends the vibration assessments be conducted on a weekly basis. Is there any other comments?
Just in regards to the commemoration. Yeah. All right. Okay, so all those in favor and a physical show of hands. Anyone opposed? And that's carried unanimously. All right, so the item we're on right now is 4.5, Heritage Conservation Plan for 248 to 60 Grand River Avenue for review and comment. May I please have a mover and a seconder on the motion? Yourself? All right, is there any discussion or are there any questions of staff on this item specifically?
Can we make a presentation? Just making sure. No? Okay, perfect.
All right, so no questions in the room, and I don't see any questions virtually.
Oh, you do have one virtual.
Oh, yes, Rob?
Would there be, on page 25 of the report, there was mention of a commemorative plaque for the various businesses and industries that, and particularly mills that were operating in the area, and there's some well, I noticed there's some spelling issues and some other items that could be tidied up. Prior to that, can we have some input on what that plaque might say in the final format?
Through the chair, if I may, I'm not the applicant, I'm just staff, and typically I don't speak to these items, but if the chair will recognize me. So that was a draft proposed interpretive sign. If there are thoughts you'd like to see that, I noticed some of the corrections, and I have the page up on my screen beside me. So I noticed some of the errors shown on that page. They're viewed as typos, but that's because the Word document of the program didn't recognize the spelling there. So some of those may just be because they weren't added to the dictionary. But if committee members would like to provide some thoughts, those can either form part of your comments tonight, or you can also provide feedback as individuals. It's a Planning Act item, and that's something that staff can take into consideration. This is a site plan application, so it's not the same like a zoning application where it goes to council for approval, but we do have conditions. So staff will going to impose conditions relating to the commemorative signage, and then we can take any Heritage Committee comments into consideration when we finalize the wording, or if you have other thoughts, maybe a picture that might, help to provide that context or that image, you can certainly forward it to staff as individual members of the public, if there's nothing voted on tonight.
Is that all, Rob? All right, is there any other questions of staff or comments? Madam Clerk, can you just clarify the comments?
So as Patrick said, it sounds like you guys can provide comments tonight. Otherwise, the comment that I will include is that the committee requests an opportunity to provide input on the text and content of the interpretive sign.
Thank you. All right, so in regards to this item, all those in favor, can you show physical hands? And anyone opposed? Seeing none. So that's carried unanimously, and I'll now turn the chair back to you.
All right. I hope you guys had fun in my absence. So I will move on to the next item, which is item 4.3, proposed removal of a heritage attribute at 135 Sydenham Street. I will ask Bonnie McChesney, the applicant, to come forward regarding this item. As a reminder, you have 10 minutes inclusive of questions for your presentation.
I don't know if everybody has a copy of the pictures and things that, yes, okay, so, when we bought the house 4 years ago, the porch had just been painted and it looked lovely. And now it's falling down, and each rainfall that we get, more and more is coming down. And I got a quote to have it replaced exactly the way it is now. And the quote was $35,000 plus tax. So that's not something that we can afford moving forward. So we just need to get it down before the snow flies, because once the snow comes, it's gonna come crashing down anyway. That's it.
Okay, any members of the committee have any questions for the delegation? Sandra, I see your hand. Go ahead. Oh, you're on mute, Sandra. Sorry, we can't hear you.
I was reading in the, we're good?
Yeah.
Okay, I was reading in the paperwork that plans are being made that if that can happen in the future, that it can be replaced with something that looks the same. Is that something that is on your list of things to do, or is that for someone else?
That would be for a new owner.
Okay.
Okay, that's it from you, Sandra. Yeah. Any other members of the committee have any questions for the delegation? Go ahead.
Thank you for coming today. Is there anything here that can be salvaged? Like, it's just the pillars and the art, like, is that wrought iron at the top?
It is, and that we're planning on salvaging, if nothing else. But all of the pillars are sawdust. I can actually put my hand through it. So we can't save any of that. The roof, which I at first thought we might be able to save, turns out to be nothing but tar paper. So, but we are intending to save the top fancy part.
Any other questions, Dora? No?
$35,000 is a lot of money.
Any other committee members? Please, go ahead.
You might have already answered that, but you said if you could, the kind of decorative fancy part. You
Yes.
mentioned wrought iron, so do you mean the part that sits right above the columns?
Yes.
Cresting.
Yes.
On the roof line.
So.
Yeah.
That, okay. What about what sits?
Where the pitch is on
Yes.
that would be kept, but
That would be kept.
it's this metal here.
I'm not sure where we're gonna put it,
Mhm.
but we want to keep it.
Any other questions for people from the committee?
And could I just say, Patrick was phenomenal in helping me get this put together, because I know there's a lot of companies doing all these things, and when I first looked at it, it just seemed like it was going to be an impossible task. So then Patrick came over, and within a couple of hours, we had it all. So I just wanted to.
Since I'm here, do you know any of the history of the house, like any previous owners?
Actually, I
Gone through that?
have in the living room, above the French doors, wallpaper was being taken down, and they discovered that above the doors, people that lived there had signed it.
Oh, yes.
So we have 1986 and 1903, and so so I'm going to take a picture of it. Patrick would like a picture of it so that we can.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Okay, I have some questions. Okay, Dan, go ahead first. Go
So
first.
I've looked through the pictures. I restore all this kind of stuff all the time. It does look like it's in very bad condition.
Yes, it is.
The roof especially and the posts.
Mhm.
If it is taken apart, is there any way that you could save one of the posts or both of the posts in the basement somehow, so that if you do sell the property and they want to recreate what was there, they would have something to go.
Yes, we've already
With-
taken down a couple of the curly cues.
Oh, the
That you can't-
corbels and.
Yeah, that you can't really see there. We've got 2 of those down in actually fairly. They're not gonna fall apart, so we've got those, and we certainly can try and do probably one of the posts that's against the house, because it would have had less wear.
Yeah,
So we can
Just-
do that,
if they want to try and reproduce what was there, then they have something.
okay?
Any other questions? So I'm gonna ask a couple questions. So you said you purchased the property 4 years ago.
Yes,
So when you purchased the property,
yep,
you were aware that it was a designated property,
yes,
correct? And you're, at that time, were you aware that the porch was part of that designation?
no, but it wouldn't have bothered me at the time because it looked pristine.
So the porch and the roof were in a good state of repair.
Yes.
So within 4 years, all of this damage and rot has happened?
Well, I think what happened was the porch was painted just before the house was sold, because there is so much damage inside the paint.
Mhm.
And once the paint started to flake a bit, then all of a sudden it was horrendous.
So what I'm hearing is when you think when you bought the property,
Mhm.
someone had applied paint over all the damaged rot,
Yes,
and therefore you couldn't see it until the paint had
absolutely,
an opportunity to go.
Yeah.
Okay.
because otherwise it wouldn't have been demolished as much as it had been.
And then I think Dan touched on my other kind of concern. So the application, as I read it, is for a demo permit, but there is no porch to replace it.
No, we're just going to take it down, keep the base that's there, and not have a porch other than the floor.
And there are no plans to replace it as well.
No, not at this point. If I win the lottery, I'll be the first one to put it back up.
I wish there was a lottery like that. Maybe we could all be winners at some point in the future. Okay, and when you bought the property, were you
Mhm.
aware that the municipality had this grant to help assist with the cost of some restoration?
No, actually, I wasn't.
Did you, was the first time you became aware of this was when you went through this conversation with Patrick?
Yes,
Okay, perfect, thank you. Last
Sorry,
question?
Last question.
Okay, go ahead.
Under house being designated, is there anything in the designation saying that if something falls off your house that's part of the designation, do you have to replace it, or can you leave it on?
I think that's a question for Patrick. We'll get
You
into
know what I
that.
mean? Okay.
We'll get into that. Well, you can ask Patrick that question.
somebody
I
up
think
there.
that's good. Oh, Greg, do you have a question for delegation? Sorry, go ahead, Greg.
Yes, I just have a quick question. If the delegate knows if the porch was built at the same time as the house, or if it was added after the fact?
I'm 99% sure it was added after the fact, because the floor that it's sitting on, which is also wood, is in very, very good shape. So
Okay,
I think has been painted many times, the floor has. So I'm sure that the porch has gone on top of that.
okay. So, and maybe this is a question for Patrick. When there's something like this that's designated, even if it's been added after the fact, like what is designated? Is it the whole thing, or is it the original structure, and anything that's added after the fact? Is that still considered part of the designation?
Yeah, that's a question that we'll
Okay,
Patrick go to get there.
okay, thank you.
Any other questions for our presenter before we? No? Okay, thank you very much. So Patrick, you are now on. Thank you very much for being patient.
Oh, thank you, Chair. And I'll just wait for the clerks to put up the PowerPoint.
Am I done?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Thank you. So this is the staff presentation for 135 Sydenham Street, and this is actually application HD 0123. So our demolition applications under the Heritage Act. Next slide, please. So the property in question, 135 Sydenham Street, is designated individually under Part 4 of the Act. It's an older designation. It's bylaw 108/82. So it was designated in 1982. Next slide, please. The property is located on Sydenham Street. You can see it's on the east side of the street. Next slide. So the app, as Bonnie has shared with us, the request before the committee tonight for comment is to approve the removal of the porch. The porch is a heritage attribute identified in the bylaw. I have some photos here that were taken by my colleague Michelle, and that was in April 2023 when Bonnie first reached out to the city. So at that time, the photos Michelle took, we could see a little bit of cracking, for example, on the bottom for one of the pillars, and we could see that the sections of the soffit and fascia were starting to sag, and that's really the what looks like a latex paint that, as Bonnie said, what appears to be applied was holding the porch together, and had started to sag inside. And then on my return from leave in August 2023, I went and visited the site and took some photos, and we can see that the front soffit and fascia had just degraded to the point where they could easily be removed. My husband, it looks like, again, this has been happening for some time. It appears that the latex paint maybe almost acted like a waterproof barrier. Unfortunately, the tar, paper, and wood roof started leaking. So instead of keeping water out, water was kept inside. And that has resulted in what appears to be slow but extensive water damage through various components. It's worse at the front of the porch than the back, just because the natural slope of the roof would at least encourage the water to roll downward and forward. But once it got into the wood through any gap in that tar paper, it would stay there. And whether, summer heat or winter cold, then you have ice expanding in the winter, which further pushes apart the wood. The latex paint, being a rubber or plastic compound, it holds together. And so that's why you see in that April 2023 photo that kind of sagging. That is actually the paint almost like a holding together like a water balloon might. And the wood itself is actually underneath starting to come apart. If we go to the next slide, please. And so these are some close-up photos of the front, what used to be the soffit and fascia. And these are just to get both ends of the front of the roof. But you can see the large hole on the left-hand side, and you can even see a bit of sunlight poking through on the right-hand side in about the middle of that photo. So it likely started more like the right side, that little pinhole where, whether from ongoing weathering or UV degradation, these little holes started to open up in the tar paper, eventually through the wood, and then that got into the structure below the roof skin, and it had nowhere to go. I wouldn't be surprised if this started occurring some time ago. This is a small section of roof, and if not, done as part of a larger re-roofing job, or if it looks okay on first inspection, it might be left out. But to do on its own is something a lot of roofers may actually not take on, just because of the size of the work. So even if it was seen, it might have been hard to get some repairs done by a prior owner, and they may just not have come to the city for questions about what to do with their roof. But what it really looks like is this past summer, that all that slow buildup finally gave way, and that the paint could no longer hold the wood, and the wood itself had come apart so much that it just, there's nothing keeping the front of that porch together. So next slide, please. Staff considered the standards and guidelines by Parks Canada when reviewing this application, but acknowledged, the standards and guidelines are there to provide a way forward for restoration projects. That is the primary goal. So if we look through the standards, and I flagged certain standards that I find were applicable, but the more specific chapters that sort of guided the approach in reviewing this application. So we see in standard 9B is to document any intervention you make for future reference. Standards 13 and 14 also speak to what happens if there's deterioration and what if you're replacing features. So the standards do acknowledge in some cases heritage attributes, or what they would call at the federal level a character defining element. They can, just based on their design or the materials they were made from, they can deteriorate to a point where they cannot be repaired. In some cases, it might be partial. You might have brackets, like in the case of the front porch, where maybe there's a surviving bracket or two that can become a pattern. But ultimately, what do you do when your heritage attributes deteriorate? And if you need to make new heritage attributes, how do you go about that? Or how do you replace something that was lost? And it's not to use conjecture, but to base what you recreate off surviving examples or sufficient evidence. So physical evidence, that's a piece that survived, or documentary evidence, that's the photos you might take. Depending on the nature, you could also use oral evidence. So looking at those standards and considering this, if viewed as a continuum from removal for safety and then recreation of the feature in the future, this is that first half. And going to the next slide. So with Bonnie's permission, I was able to visit the site and take detailed photos with measurements of each of the components, or the bulk of the components making up the porch. That's both architectural details like the roundels that were in the front corners by the pillars, the actual measurements for various components of the posts themselves. And so this has been taken by staff. I've included a record of all the photos I've taken as an appendix to the report. I believe it's Appendix F, where I have the actual measurements and the distances measured. So if the porch pillar itself is 10 inches across at the top of the capital, or 10.5 inches, 11 inches, that's noted based on what can be seen in the photo, and that record is going to be kept by the city. That is going to be that documentary evidence that could enable, and we would, as Bonnie said, right now the financial capacity is not there to rebuild the porch. That was the intent at the very beginning of the project until that quote came in. And it was not financially feasible with the grant we can provide right now, and that grant is established by bylaw. I do have direction from council to report back. I'll be reporting back later this fall on ways we could improve the grant program. That was part of, if committee remembers, the response to the changing of the Heritage Register project and its feasibility. And one of the comments we heard from Mayor Davis was he'd like to see an enhanced grant program to provide assistance for new owners as well as for existing property owners. So that something like this would hopefully be something that could be fixed with city assistance in the future. So we have a record of what the porch looked like, and I did this month. This will be kept by the city on our files for the property, and should a new owner approach us about looking to fix the porch, we will have measurements as near as we can get to provide that owner to sort of drop new plans. Next slide, please. So this application is to remove a heritage attribute, and under the Heritage Act, that is not something that council can really delegate to staff or the Heritage Committee. So council does need to make a decision on this application. Staff will be recommending to council that the application be approved. We're going to impose one condition, more as a technical condition rather than something we have out of concern. Our condition is that if a demolition permit under the Building Code Act is not issued by the end of the year, then the approval would lapse. And this is not because we have any concerns about, the applicant not going through the demolition. They wanted to move ahead with the speedy, and they did come to the city in April. But this is just for the technical precaution as a best practice. We do not want to have an approval for removing heritage attributes that goes on indefinitely. Let's say, through the demolition, it actually was just what could be seen at the front, and the roof and the porch were much more structurally sound than originally believed. And should, Bonnie wish to then restore the porch, then going forward, that approval doesn't necessarily last indefinitely to a future owner who might want to take the porch down and say, well, you approved this 3 years ago or 10 years ago. And this is just purely for technical reasons. Once the permit is issued and the work goes ahead, there's no lapsing of this approval. There's no after the fact changes. Then it is permanent and the approval has been given. So that concludes my staff presentation. I'm happy, or actually, sorry, I apologize. There was one last slide. The recommendation before the committee, and that is that you provide your comments, and staff will be including those in our report to committee of the whole. Right now, we would be aiming at committee of the whole in September, which is the 14th. That concludes my presentation, and I open the floor to any questions. I'm happy to answer those.
Thanks, Patrick, for your presentation. Questions from the committee? We got lots. Bev, go ahead.
If the applicant were to, subsequent to the demolition, decide that they'd like to perhaps create a new porch, but not a full porch, just with some elements of what was originally there, would that be allowed for the grant? Could there be?
I would, through the chair, I would have to look into how we worded the bylaw explicitly to see if that can be permitted. From best practices, or is it supportable from a heritage policy standpoint? Yes, we could. A sympathetic porch can still be supported. Having all these measurements is just so, like, the best case scenario, if the porch is ever rebuilt, we have as much detail that we can provide, the applicant at that time. But certainly something sympathetic could be installed. It would probably still be a heritage permit application. It would probably need a building permit to add a porch structure or some kind, but they could go through with that, and they just have to demonstrate to the heritage committee and staff that they show us the design, and we would see that, is it sympathetic?
That's it, Bev? Okay. Tamara, you're next.
I was just gonna ask, I could start a silly question with HD 01-23, like, is this the one and only heritage demolition that we have this year?
Through the chair, yes.
Okay.
The last one was in 2020. Through the chair, the demolition only applies when something is being removed outright as a heritage attribute. If you were, repairing the porch, if you were expanding or installing a new one and not removing a heritage attribute, it'd be an alteration. But because the plan here, as Bonnie has shared, is to remove the deteriorating parts of the porch and then leaving the platform, but there's no repair or restoration work happening. It's just the demolition. This was a change to the Heritage Act, so it had to go through this route.
Any other questions? Dan?
So if they are allowed to remove the porch with a demolition permit, is there any, can we specify that it has to be done by an experienced person rather than just somebody with a sledgehammer that's gonna rip all the brick off in front of the house? Is there?
So there would be, through the demolition permit, they'd have, like, the actual building department, they'd have to specify what they're doing and what else is being done. Through the city, we can't specify, like, a certain person or a certain firm do the work. I think it'd be a little tricky to establish criteria on the floor as to what an acceptable contractor is. That's something that's actually more to the Ministry of Labor if someone's meeting standards. But these are the owners applying. They have no interest in their home being damaged in the process. So I think there's an incentive there. They will be looking for someone who will show adequate care when removing the porch.
Anything else?
I just know how easy things can happen behind a porch like that, where water's gotten in and the bricks are soft. And I would just be careful.
Right, well, the two pillars that are
Just-
actually against the house.
you're part of the meeting.
Oh, I'm
so
sure.
Okay. It's just for us.
What I can share in answering the question is that I think there's some photos in the report, but those pilasters against the wall are also starting to remove. They're not right up against the wall and fully attached. You can see where the nails are. It's fairly easily accessible. So that those can be removed rather than, just sort of tearing it off and hoping for the best.
Anything else, Dan? Any other members of the committee? Oh, no, we're not there yet. Okay. I'm two questions for Patrick. So I definitely understand this was designated 82. So there's obviously been 40 years of wear and tear to that since it was designated. And the current property owner hasn't owned the property for that amount of time. Normally, I would say something here like this is like, improper maintenance has not been done on the building. The building has not, the owner hasn't kept it up to, that kind of standard that we would like. However, this owner also kind of inherited this problem, right? It was not a problem that they envisioned happening when they purchased the property. The problem I have with this one is we are removing a designated heritage feature, and there is no guarantee that that is going to be replaced now or anytime in the future. And so that's where I kind of am leery about this, is that there is no guarantee that it's going to be there. And if it's not going to be there, then shouldn't it be removed from the designation bylaw? Or, it's almost like there's some kind of disconnect here happening where we have something in the designation bylaw that says it is a designated heritage attribute. We're proposing to remove it with no plan to replace it. So I guess my question would be, what guarantees are there that that porch is going to be replaced now and into the future?
Through the chair, that's a good question, and there is no guarantee when a heritage attribute is removed that it will be replaced. But looking at the porch, when I was doing my site visits, and we can see in the photos, I will say I'm unsure how much of that porch would remain there if it was to be, let's say, disassembled, cataloged, and then the sound pieces reused. Not like if that was the plan. I can honestly say I'm not sure how much of that porch would survive the disassembly process for reuse. I suspect that water damage has been occurring for some time. And so, yes, there are probably sound pieces. And the building department went by and their staff were not concerned that it was like of it needing an order to comply. But I suspect a lot of the components have some water damage or some signs of it. Given that extensive deterioration, that is a type of change that can just occur naturally. That's why we have the process in the Heritage Act to remove heritage attributes, and why it was updated so that it didn't obligate the city to repeal the bylaw entirely. So with the removal, we would review the bylaw. We're bound to review the bylaw and then amend it to reflect what was lost, but we keep identifying what remains.
So there is going to be an amendment to the bylaw as a result.
That will be a future report back through the committee. Once the work is done, we'll reevaluate, and we have to update the bylaw to the current standards under the Act as far as its format. So clearly explaining the heritage attributes, the reasons for designation. It's a formatting exercise, but it will be something we carry out.
And then I guess my other question was for you. I originally saw the pictures and I didn't know who was doing the pictures and the measurements. So that gives me some relief that you went and you did them and you measured them and you did them almost in as scientific a method as I would do. That gives me a lot of things. How much time did it take you to do all of those measurements?
Through the chair, I'd say once I got to the site, probably about a half hour. I was only me doing it, so some of the angles, I will admit, see some some photos are doubled up in that record, and that's just because how easy it was to show my starting point for the measurement for clarity, and then a follow-up photo to make sure I got the actual measurement clearly shown on the photo. But it's just given the size of the porch, it did not take a lot of time. As Bonnie had saved the one roundel that from the front facade that made that part very easy to do the measurements from on the ground. I didn't need to get up onto a ladder, for example.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
And Chair, if I may note, I know too there was another question about attributes. What is heritage after the designation? So our additions heritage, and that was, I believe, Greg Wilson's question to the applicant originally. I can answer that now unless others have questions.
No, go ahead. Thank you.
So, and just for the committee's benefit as well. So when we designate a property, we identify what its heritage attributes are and provide that as a list in the bylaw. And now, back in the day, it was sort of a paragraph explaining the different parts of the property. Today, it's typically done as a bullet list that explains, these brackets on the front facade or on all three side and front facades, and they reflect the property's architectural value. So we establish all that when the bylaw is written and when it's passed by council. When something is done after the fact, if it's an addition after the bylaw, then it wouldn't be captured as a heritage attribute. That said, you can designate and recognize properties that have had changes. So small farmhouse, and then that was expanded later on, the designation bylaw can recognize all of the changes that have happened to that property, but it's sort of a point in time. If we were to recognize something new, we would need to amend the bylaw to add it. So this porch was in place when the bylaw was passed. I pulled the old designation case file. It does appear to have the procedural documents, so notices going out, records in the paper. I could not find the actual evaluation form and then the other information, unfortunately. So I don't know at the time if that was a factor of who did the research and presented that to the city, if it was a request from the property owner, and what level of research was done, if it was all sort of word of mouth. But I think it was not the first porch. I have the procedural steps. I don't have documentation in the case file.
I don't know as well. That was the year I was born when this designation bylaw went in. So I'm not sure about where the state of the Ontario Heritage Act when I was born, but I'm assuming it was a much, much watered down version of what it is. So the standards were not as high back then involving documentation and research. As I point out here, like in the designation bylaw, it says, which is probably the original, right? It talks about the porch being probably the original porch, but no one actually went through and did the level of research that if this property were coming before us now with a designation, we would go and look and try and find out a lot more of those answers. Yeah. Okay, any last questions for Patrick? Thank you for a very thorough and detailed report, Patrick.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we're on to comments. So there is the ability for us to add comments on this demolition permit, and staff will include those comments in the report going forward to committee of the whole. So anyone have any comments about that?
Just, I guess the obvious one, just that the pictures and the dimensions get cataloged for future reference in the event that the porch does get rebuilt.
Okay, captured. Thank you. Any other members of the committee? Hey, Lise, go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you to the owner because for allowing our staff, Patrick, is amazing to do all that cataloging and even the measurements. Like we've never had that experience before, I don't think ever, and that's significant. And I really hope that's something in the future come to us for anything else like this. That's a concern. I would hope that's something we could do because we often don't catalog things. We just, it's gone. And this gives a potential that in future, if they wanted to restore the porch.
Right.
You don't have to imagine it. It's all, yeah. So thank you to you and staff.
Okay, any other comments? I would like to add one, I guess, that I am trying to think about the right language here. Worry about removing a heritage attribute feature with no plan to replace that feature. I think I said that like in my questions too, right? That was my one concern. I would really, normally I'd like to see the demolition permit and this come forward together in like one big thing. Understand the constraints of time and the monetary resources, which is why we tried to get this grant, which didn't previously exist, to be able to help property owners with that. But that's just one concern I have, that there's no guarantee that the porch will ever go back onto that property. Any other comments from committee members? So we have 3 comments then that have been captured by the clerk.
I did have one that I heard during the discussion that I'm not sure if you wanted this included. The committee recommends that the individual contractor who completes the removal be conscientious of the other heritage attributes on the home.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
That would be the only other comment that I heard during the discussion.
Now, did we find out whether or not the porch was the same timeline as the house? Did Patrick have that information? No. So I'm looking at the design of the house and it does look like the porch is a different style compared to the remainder of the house.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because it has some of those, right? It is like kind of an Italian Brantford cottage. It's got the barge board, which
It's like they tried to do some form of a pairing.
Yeah, and like the brackets and everything. There's certain elements of the porch that speak to that kind of Italian style, right? Even the wrought iron thing,
yeah,
on the roof as well. That screams Italian, right? So it may not be. No, we don't know, I guess is the best way of saying about the age of the porch. It may be like a later edition that then, right, encapsulates a lot of those ideas.
Agreed.
I've never seen that type of resting on the top with half circles like that. To me, that almost seems earlier than the Italian.
Yeah. So Rob. Sorry, go ahead, Rob.
Just one general comment that the committee would be supporting the removal of the heritage attribute with regret. Just so that it doesn't leave the impression that we're all happy about it or this was an easy decision, but that generally we would try and find other means to not go this route, but in this case, that doesn't seem to exist.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, kind of like opening the door to, hey, let's remove any and all heritage attributes.
Not setting a precedent.
Yeah, very smart, very good comment, Rob. So we have now 5, I believe we're up to, those 5 comments. Discussion on those 5 comments, or are we ready to vote on all of our comments? Oh, yes, we need a mover and a seconder for those 5 comments. I see people in the room. I'm gonna say Dan and Lise as movers and seconders. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. All those opposed? Thank you. I declare that carried. All right, we're getting there, people. On our long, lengthy agenda. Do we have Mr. Bernard here? Yeah. Okay. So we have received a late delegation request. Should the committee wish, I will ask if anyone would like to move a motion to waive the rules that section 15.6 of the procedural bylaw be waived to permit a delegation past the prescribed deadline. So, is there a mover or a seconder for a motion like that? Yep, so I have Tamara and Lise. So, since we're waiving the procedural bylaw, this requires a 2/3 majority vote. Okay, super majority. Any questions about what we're doing here? Just want to make sure everyone's aware of what's going on.
I'm just doing the math, make sure I know how many people are receiving.
Yeah, 2/3 of 8, right?
We've got more than 8.
So what's next item? And
Yeah.
It's 84 Market Street. Forester Street.
You need 8.
So we need 6.
There's 11.
There's 11 of us? Oh,
We
wow.
just-
You
we just
need
have
8.
one more join. Yeah, so 8.
So we need 8. Okay. So everyone's clear, we're voting on receiving an additional delegation. All those in favor? Thank you. All those opposed? So I declare that carried then. We have approved the waiving of the rules, so I will therefore ask Mr. Peter Vacano as the applicant for item 4.4 to come into the room virtually to present to us. And as a reminder, I know Mr. Vacano has been here many times, so he probably is sick of me saying that he has 10 minutes inclusive of his questions. Mr. Vacano, over to you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Patrick. I wasn't gonna be a delegate tonight, but it seemed that maybe I should have a few words to say regarding our application to clean the limestone exterior wall of 84 Market Street. So we've submitted our method and our materials that we'd like to use to clean the limestone on the 70-year-old building, which has never been cleaned. I do not believe it's limestone we feel could be brought back to life that would give the building a little bit more pronounced appearance. And I'm not sure what else I could say other than we're using a material called Heritage Restorer. It is produced by a company from the United States in Pennsylvania, from Pennsylvania. It's a company called EcoChem. It is a detergent material. It is applied with a low pressure sprayer and it is rinsed with a low pressure sprayer. And that's about it. The amount of time it would take to start and complete the work would be approximately 1 day. And we have people from Cortland, company called Van Worden Group, which specialize in cleaning these type of heritage buildings and limestone in particular. And they've used this product many times before and with great success. It removes all the soot off the building and that's it. It is environmentally friendly as detergent can be. It is non-corrosive. And that's about it. I'll answer any questions the committee may have.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Vacano. Any questions from members of the committee? Okay, seeing none, I'll ask one or two. I noticed like this material that you're using to clean things. I'm a little disturbed by the technical data, which just says it has a pH of greater than 1. And limestone, as we all know, is very reactive. And it says that this is safe to use on limestone. So I don't know how something that it has a pH of 1, which is very acidic, and would react with, limestone is safe to use on it. And then my second kind of question, I guess, would be about the pressure. These things usually use pressure washers, and if the pressure is too high, it could then start to like abrade the limestone and wear away the limestone. So are they able to adjust the amount of pressure that they're using to make sure that they're using the least amount of pressure possible to make sure that the limestone doesn't deteriorate when they blast it?
Well, they're not blasting it. It's a low pressure sprayer, you know, a pump sprayer. Like a insecticide sprayer that anyone would use on their garden. They apply the material, the detergent, and first they wet the wall with clean water, clear water. And then they apply this detergent with a low pressure, non-abrasive hand pump sprayer, and they let it sit for 10 or 15 minutes. And then depending on how it removes or, you know, loosens the soot, they may apply a second spray on it. It's not abrasive. It's not high pressure. Don't know. I do not understand you saying there's no abrasiveness whatsoever.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And then the pH issue?
Well, I can't answer pH issues. I don't know much about pH issues. You're saying what? That it's 1?
Well, on the technical data that you've supplied, it says technical data pH, and it just says greater than or equal to 1, which then would mean that it's a strong acid, and limestone is eaten away by acids.
This is a mild acid. I mean, if you read the description at the top of that spec sheet, it is a mild acid. It has some acid in it, yes. And it's only on the stone again for 10 or 15 minutes, and then it's rinsed off.
Yeah, a pH neutral solution would be 7. So I would say a weak acid would be a 5, or between 5 and 9. And here it's saying that the pH is 1, which is like a strong acid. That's like a hydrochloric acid or something like that, concentrated hydrochloric acid.
I don't know anything about that sort of thing. Sorry.
And then I guess my final question is, I see that you're applying to the Heritage Grant for some of this work as well, right?
Yes.
So this is the first time that you've applied for one of these Heritage Grants on any of your properties? Is that correct?
I can't remember. I'd hate to say yes, and I'd hate to say no. I can't remember. We have received a downtown revitalization grant 15 years ago. I think that was our last one, regarding a fascia at the, forget where, if it was the old Expositor building on Duluth Street.
Oh yeah, that was about a decade ago, something like that. Yeah,
No.
I remember that. But it wasn't a Heritage Grant. So,
No, I've never applied for one.
So thank you for applying to the Heritage Grant for this project, and hopefully it helps make your building look that much better for downtown Brantford. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so now we will move on to Patrick, who has an overview of this item for us.
Thank you, Chair. And once again, I'll just wait for the clerk to put my staff presentation on the screen. Thank you, Lisa. Apologies, there's a typo. This is actually the third Heritage Grant of the year, so it should say HG0323. This is for 84 Market Street. That was the Foresters Building downtown. Next slide, please. So just for context, so the property is located within the Victoria Park Square Heritage Conservation District, designated under Part 5 of the Heritage Act. Next slide. and it's located at the southwest corner of Wellington and Market Streets. Next slide, please. I've taken just some contextual photos. So this shows the type of soot staining, mold or mildew, and soot accumulation over approximately 60, maybe even going on 70 years. Again, as Mr. McKenna said, there's no clear sign that the building has been cleaned, but the limestone facade is sensitive to acid rain and ongoing soiling. So this work really is just to remove that soiling. And I know the committee might be familiar more with the guidelines, like the standards and guidelines or the Victoria Park Square Heritage District guidelines. Again, high pressure is never recommended for masonry. Using low pressures, using gentle materials, not using media blasting. So I know Nathan as chair was asking those questions for clarity. My understanding from talking to my colleague Michelle, who started processing this application, the companies in question and the materials in use were actually come recommended. I believe the staff overseeing this application for Mr. Vicano earlier in the process actually has a family member who is on Toronto's Heritage Committee, and she had asked him for some guidance on if they've ever recommended or seen a product used, and this is one of the products they recommended because it is in fact pretty gentle in their experience. And looking through the specification sheet, it does have a low pH. For context, vinegar and lemon juice can be a pH of 2. So yes, battery acid, hydrochloric acid can be quite acidic at 0. But also we have very acidic foods that we come in contact to every day. So the procedure is to first test inconspicuously and then apply that water onto the wall first. That'll help dilute the strength of the acid, and with a low dwell time, it only gets the surface, the soot, mildew, etc. that's in the other chemicals or materials that have accumulated. So it should be a fairly quick process. It should have no impact on the stone underneath, but it should help clean up that appearance and just remove those signs of weathering. So next slide, please. So we received the 2 quotes as required under the Heritage Grant Program for applications. Both quotes are about similar prices. We've attached those in the submission materials for the committee to review. And next slide, the safety or specification sheet that was submitted. And I just include that just for the context. So this is something designed to work with limestone. Again, this company is manufacturing this product and selling it for use. So they are having to do their own, they have to make sure it works on that product before they advertise it as such. So it works on limestone, sandstone, brick, a variety of materials, and it can handle a range of stains. Everything from just hard water, mineral deposits, to other pollution stains. So this product is appropriate. Both contractors have familiarity with using heritage buildings and are using low pressures. We don't have a specific range for the pressure wash, but that is something that's going to have to be determined on site because each material is different. You could have a low setting that is still too high for some, old bricks that are very soft or have already spalled. So that's something the contractor, they're familiar with this type of work, and they have material that is gentle enough and it's only used for short periods. Next slide, please. So using our standard grant calculation formula, we take the eligible costs where there's a difference. It is the lower eligible costs pre-tax. That number, 50% of it, is the funding amount. So the application in this case is the eligible costs are $6,500 using the lower of the 2 quotes, and the eligible or the grant therefore is $3,250. So there is ample funding left in the account for this application. Next slide, please. So based on the material provided to us and the scope of work, staff are comfortable this is eligible conservation work. Accordingly, staff recommended the application be approved. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer if there's any further questions.
Okay, questions for Patrick? Yep. Councillor Sullivan, go ahead.
Something's triggered me when I'm looking at the spec sheet. It says reduces liability. The fact that that's even stated says that it's obviously not free of liability. So has anybody done any research on this to see if they've had any issues with using this stuff on limestone before?
Sorry, through the chair, Councillor, could you clarify which page you're just seeing that on? I
208.
have it up. 208, all using the PDF.
It's right under the advantages. It says reduces liability. And whenever something specifies something like that, it gives me a red flag.
So the second point on the first page of the spec sheet under advantages.
Yeah, through the chair, I can't quite comment on what that would mean, but again, this is a product that is specifically marketed for this type of work, of historic buildings and sensitive masonries. And again, my understanding is this actually comes recommended through experience from another heritage committee. They've seen this tested and used and are comfortable with it.
Anything else, Councillor Sullivan? No. Okay, thank you. Any other members of the committee have questions for Patrick? Okay, I'll just share a little bit of an anecdote, I guess, perhaps about why I'm a little bit concerned about this, or have, as I've expressed previously. My friend, I went to see my friend in the summer up in Sault Ste. Marie, and they have a bell out in front of the museum, and it got graffitied. And then there was the city came by and used a power washer to sandblast it off, and in doing so, they did quite a bit of abrasive damage to the bell. And you can see the parts where the patina or the corrosion layer on the outside, which is actually protecting the copper underside, and you can see where it's nicked through, and you can see the copper underneath. So excessive pressure is something, when they say pressure wash, that was one of the things that raised concern, because that doesn't mean significant pressure. I'm thinking, an electrical power washer, whereas Mr. Vicano described it as, one of those little handheld pump operated ones, which is considerably different level of force, right? Okay. So I think we're ready for a motion to approve this grant then. There are no comments for this. It's just the recommendation is that the Heritage Grant be approved. So would anyone like to make that motion? Tamara?
Well then, sorry,
Second.
I'd like to back up then. I was waiting for
Question?
comments. It's not really a question, it's more of a comment. Am I okay with that?
Yeah, let's get it on the floor and then we can have that discussion
Okay.
about what it is that you're gonna have. So we have a mover, Tamara. We need a seconder. Okay, Bev, thank you. So questions about the approval? Dan, go ahead.
It's not a question, it's more of a comment. After what happened with the armories downtown, the cleaning, it's more of a, I guess, a personal, like it or not like it, kind of look, taking that, like you talked about patina on the bell, they took the patina off of the armories. And I think that they're gonna do the same thing with this building. They're gonna take the patina off the front of it. I think there's other things that they could do with it. I guess it's more of a personal taste, and I'm totally against it. So I will not be voting for it.
Okay, there. Any other comments on the approval or discussion on the approval before we vote? Sandra, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
I'm looking at this and we're making these suggestions, but I guess one question I have is, what are there options? Are there alternatives? Or like I just heard what you said about that. Like, what is the alternative to clean this building that there is?
So we don't have that before us, what we have is before us is an approval of a grant. Or-
Yes, the previous question was more like, you know, the people are saying something else is an option. That's what I'm hearing. Like why you would turn this down, that there are other options.
The only thing that we're considering though, I don't want to get lost in the minutia of everything. The proposal or the approval is for the grant to be, it's not about the work happening at all.
Okay.
It's just about the grant option. The ability that they need to clean this building is, I think, oh gosh. Alan can correct me if I'm wrong, because I know he's here. It's like maintenance on a building or a project. You don't need a demo, you know, a heritage permit or anything like that. You're not removing a heritage feature or anything like that. It's just about cleaning the building, and they're cleaning the building, and because they're doing that, they're eligible for this grant. So what we are approving tonight here is the grant, the awarding of a grant, not about anything to do with we're okay with the cleaning, we're not okay with the cleaning. None of that. It's just about the grant approval. Does that make things clearer for people? I see Cynthia shaking her head. No. Do you want to clarify about what you're not clear on, Cynthia? You're on mute though, so we can't hear you. So if you want to unmute yourself, then we'll be able to hear your thoughts.
Okay, there we go. So what I'm understanding is that there may be another way to clean the building without damaging it. But the question on the table is not anything about the cleaning or the damage, it's just the grant money. Is that what I'm hearing?
Correct.
Okay, so why would we agree to grant money to something when we're not sure it's not going to cause damage to a heritage site? That was a very complicated. Let me see if I can structure that more easily. Why would we consider granting money for a project that may damage a heritage site?
Yeah, that's a good question. And if that question gives you concern to not want to approve the grant, then you know you're more than welcome to vote to not approve the grant. Well, right? Any other questions or clarifications before we vote? Alan, go ahead. Maybe I misspoke and said something wrong.
No, you're correct, but just to provide some additional clarity through you to the committee. Yes, we did approve this as a minor heritage alteration application, just delegated to the staff level with major alterations here to the committee. So the work was approved. You know, Patrick and I were of the opinion that it's not going to be damaging to the building. So what we brought before you this evening is your approval of funding this work through the grant program. So again, if you don't or have concern that it may be damaged, you are free, as you said, to not approve the grant. Again, we recommended it being approved. We recommended that the work could proceed.
Okay. That clarifies things for everyone, so we know where we're at. Any other discussion on the wording of the grant before I call the question? Okay, I don't see any, so then I will call the question. All those in favor of approving the grant, please raise your hand. Okay, and all those opposed? It is a tied vote and therefore is declined. So the grant approval fails. Yes, I did. We have 11. I voted for 5 to 5. Okay, we're gonna redo the vote again so that I can make sure that I counted everyone properly. Maybe I missed myself when I was counting other people. Okay, yeah, we're gonna do a recorded vote to make it easier for everyone. So I'll call everyone's name and then you can say yes or no. Okay. I'll go through the people in person here first, and then we'll go to the people on the screen. So Member Garner,
Yes.
Member Jansen.
No.
Member Brown.
No.
Yes.
Member Capoli. Councillor Sullivan.
No.
Councillor Samwell. Member Wilson.
Yes.
Member Mikuchi.
Yes.
Member Cynthia. Chamberlain. Member Chamberlain.
Yes.
And then Member Adler.
No.
And then as chair, I will be voting yes. So, okay, so I forgot myself. It was carried on a 6-5. Thank you. So we've already done item 4.5. So now we're on to item 4.6, a proposed alteration to Brant Avenue, Jubilee Terrace Park. We now have Adrian Briggs coming forward to provide us an overview of this item. Hi, Adrian.
Hi, everyone.
I think this is your first time presenting to the committee, so welcome.
It is, yes. Thanks for having me. So I did share a presentation. Can you just flip to slide 2 for me? Yeah, that one. Thank you. All right, so through the chair to the committee, this is a request for approval to put one of 2 storyboards next to the German field houser. You can see a mock-up in this slide here from Lawn at Brook Designs. So they are the ones that would be doing the work for us. And I have the dimensions listed on the bottom of the size of the storyboard itself and the height. This was initiated as part of the War Memorials and Cenotaph Working Group report, specifically a report that came out from Council directed to staff November 17th, 2020. And this was one of the recommendations to put these storyboards. If I'm not wrong, I think this group was informed of these storyboards way back. So this is the action finally being taken to complete those recommendations. And this storyboard in particular is the first one, and so it addresses like how the gun came to be in Brantford, the soldiers that were the catalyst to why this gun was brought to the community specifically, and the second one will be more about the battle itself. And so that is, yeah, that's it for this one.
Okay, any questions for any members of the committee to Adrian? No? Seeing none. We have a report from Patrick about this. You want to go ahead with your quick and sweet little report there?
Thank you, Chair. I'll let Lisa put the presentation up on the screen. Again, this is a fairly straightforward item. I wasn't sure if the committee would even want the report or the slides, but I'll keep it as brief as I can. This is application HA0823, and just for context, we had an application in 2019 that was the repair and installation of a stone plaque on the site, and then subsequently during the pandemic, Parks brought forward a plan to re-landscape the park. So the plaque before you was contemplated at the very beginning, but it was commemorated with the stone plaque at the time, and the park has since been re-landscaped. So with that, just for context, we'll then get into the rest of the slideshow. So next slide, please. Just for the committee's information, the property is individually designated. It's not actually, with its Brant Avenue address, it's not part of the conservation district. It's designated individually, and it was designated in 1996. Next slide, please. And so just for clarity, the field howitzer is visible in photo, and you can actually see to the side of it. On the left side, that's the current granite plaque on concrete base. And then we just have an aerial showing the extent of the park. the heritage attributes are located essentially at the top of the park in the photo, the howitzer, and the Boer War Memorial. Next slide, please. So as was detailed by Adrienne and in my report, the stone plaque that's currently on site, the same information is contained on this storyboard. There's no loss of information, but tourism has been doing the research to make sure we can now show some contextual images as well. We have a copy of the original letter donating the howitzer to the city of Brantford, and then an early postcard showing the prior arrangement, four cannons at the park, of which the German field howitzer is the remaining one. This is essentially going to enhance the context and the heritage attribute of the park, that is the German field howitzer, because it gives that little bit more context to its installation, where it came from and what it means. So this is something that was, as Adrienne indicated, contemplated some time ago. It just now is being implemented. But because we're seeing that change to the gun, we just wanted to bring this forward to the Heritage Committee as a heritage permit application to show you the work that's occurring and make you aware of the chain of work. This is something returning to be implemented. Next slide, please. This concludes my staff presentation. Staff are recommending that permit application HA 0823 be approved. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Patrick? One from Lise. Go ahead, Lise.
I might have missed it in the report. So the granite plaque then will be removed, and then the storyboard instead?
Yeah, so sorry, just to make sure I heard that right. So the granite plaque is being removed from the park, but the same information on that plaque is basically contained on this storyboard, which will be installed in the same location. Now we're just adding the photos, an old postcard, and the actual letter donating the howitzer. So, but yes, same location.
Okay. And I see Greg has a question there too.
Hi there. In the picture that you showed the new plaque, I was wondering if it'd be possible, or maybe there's more of a comment, to move the plaque closer to the howitzer, because it seemed like you were right in the middle of the pathway, and if there's somebody that might be in a wheelchair or parents with buggies and stuff trying to get through, you might be possibly blocking walkways for people that need that extra room.
So through the chair, the location of the plaque, maybe it might be easy, Lisa, if you can put up slide 3 of my PDF. But the howitzer itself is sitting on a concrete pad. So the walkway is in behind where the plaque and the howitzer are. So the public would walk past or interact with the plaque from behind the howitzer. You can see that walkway going off to either side of the plaque. So if you go to the prior slide, I know it's probably the same size. But yeah, so this is a view from the street. You can see the howitzer sitting on that concrete pad. That part is not connected to the sidewalk. So there's a walkway in behind the howitzer.
Am I allowed to speak here? Sorry, to add something or no?
I will allow. Go ahead.
Okay. Also, this new storyboard is going exactly where the original heritage granite slab that you can see in this picture here, that's a little block on the ground to adjacent to it. It's going in the exact same position where the other one was originally installed.
And I'm just concerned, I've had some disability issues in the last little bit and been having to use a wheelchair. If somebody were to try and come around, is there room there for somebody that needs that access to get around? Like, I realize you could come around the right side, but if you were to come up the left where the plaque currently is, it seems like there may not be the room available. And could it be moved either closer to the howitzer or closer to the grass maybe?
I can definitely measure and check
Sure.
accessibility bandwidth for pathfinding for installation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And so just for that comment, the recommendation before the committee is approve. So There's no specific conditions, but certainly, the committee is free to provide that comment as well, just encouraging a location. If this doesn't work, can a location be found? Since we're dealing with it right now, we could, could it be placed by the flower bed out of the way, creating some options for movement? That is a comment you can provide, but then the actual recommendation would still be to approve, and staff would take that comment back and look to see if it can be implemented.
AODA compliant.
Okay, thank you. Rob, you have your hand up as well.
Yeah, the text on the storyboard makes mention of this howitzer being the last remaining piece, and the postcard being used illustrates that there are other artillery pieces there originally. Can you tell me why the city of Brantford is no longer in possession of these?
Through the chair, there may be some history on that, but I don't know it off the top of my head. Something staff would have to look into. Adrian, you may have something to add.
Committee to the chair. From my knowledge, basically the original 4 were donated, and due to lack of care over a period of time, the other 3 were so far gone that it was deemed that they could not be salvaged. And then the German field hauser was the remaining one that was able to be salvaged and maintained. I can't speak to the exact specifications of why and the story behind that. That's just my general understanding of what happened. And I don't know what date all this transpired.
Yeah, just to add some further clarity to that. We have pictures of the museum of some of the original ones that were there, and they were taken and they were relocated to city yards. And because of their weight, apparently they just sunk into the ground, like a tombstone would sink into the ground. And so that's the one. And then another one went to the military museum, and it's in the military museum. And then the other one is the one that remains there that the city restored as well. Okay. Any other questions before we move on to the motion, which is approval? Seeing no questions, then I'll ask for a mover and a seconder to approve this. Councillor Sullivan, Councillor Samwell. Any discussion on the proposal? Seeing none, I'll ask the question. All those in favor? You. I declare that carried unanimously. So now we have more fun with another designated property owned by the city with another project. So Adrian, you want to give us an overview of this one then? Oh, Adrian, sorry, you're muted. We missed you from the start.
There we go. Sorry about that. All right, so through the chairs of the committee, we are currently in the process of seeking approval to relocate one grand exhibit installation that was originally installed at Old City Hall, which, as you all know, is no longer in use by the city in its original use, to New City Hall. You can see in my two pictures here, this is the painting in question, which members of the committee approved in 2019 when the grand exhibition was installed, which is one of 10 pieces around the city. And this is pulled from the Glenhurst Art Collection. And it would be installed at 57 inches, which is standard art gallery view for best practice. And it would be installed hopefully at the corner of Queen Street and Darling. And this location was selected as not to compete with the other grand exhibit, which is in front of the Sanderson Center on the back that faces the parking lot. And also keeping in mind the Stone Lions, which is another public art piece we have on the front of City Hall. And so that was why this area was picked. There would also be an interpretation plaque that would be installed beside the painting itself, and that's the other red square that's there. Any questions?
Okay, questions for Adrian? Tamara, go ahead.
How does it get installed? Like, are you drilling holes into the building and screwing it on? Like,
So due to heritage practices, I would be recommending that parks install between mortar of the building, which is best practice for stone installation. And based on the other ones, the painting itself, it has brackets that are on the back and that would be drilled in, and then they, groove together. And then the interpretive plaque is a sort of very, I don't want to say epoxy of some sort that gets stuck. I don't know the exact materials, as Parks does the installation process for us, but I've seen the other ones get moved, and they took off the one from the old tourism center, and it didn't leave a mark, so that was good. I mean, the interpretive sign, I mean, obviously the brackets would be in the wall.
Yeah. Any other questions for Adrian? Go ahead, Dan.
How was the painting protected on the wall?
So it's not a real painting, it's a reproduction of the Glenhurst collection. So it's a fabrication and a reproduction with that's made by a local company here, and then we get it framed by a local framer. And then it does have an anti-graffiti covering on it. And that it's fairly easy. I've had graffiti on other ones and it's been fairly easy to remove. If in the past, if someone wanted to rip it off the wall, of course, if there's a will, there's a way, but generally they're pretty solidly secured.
Any other questions for Adrian? I was going to ask about the graffiti because I remember there, my frequent trips out at lunchtime involved going to get coffee, and I went past the one in Harmony Square and it was graffitied the one day. So that gives me good vibes that you've taken that into consideration, and we have a strategy for dealing with that. I also like that the placement of this one is on that corner, and you can see the camera right next to it as well to hopefully help deter those types of things from happening. And then this also balances out the corners nicely. You have the lions on the original old corner, and then you have another kind of more modern art piece on the, I guess, the newer part of the building there, and on that other corner. So thank you for that. Any last questions for Adrian? Seeing none. Patrick, do you want to give your quick report?
Thank you, Chair. And again, for context, I'll just ask that Lisa puts on the slideshow, and then if there are any questions about where we're looking at the building, we have those images. So this is application HA0923 for City Hall. Next slide, please. So City Hall itself is designated individually. It was designated in 2018 and it's under Part 4 of the Heritage Act. Next slide. So again, for the context, this is that rear corner. If you're looking at the front of the building, we have the yellow arrow showing which spot on the building we're actually dealing with. This is the sort of back corner facade. Next slide, please. And just for that context, as Adrienne has shown us where the plaque will be and the installation method between the mortar joints. I've seen the installation at the old City Hall as well, and the mechanism, and it was a fairly small hole that was created to actually mount that mounting system to the wall of old City Hall, which this was approved in 2019. So I'm confident, as Adrienne has this experience with seeing heritage conservation best practice with her background in conservation, and we're working with city staff, and we'll be able to direct them to use a suitable spot and not, mortar joints are easily repairable. If the installation does have to be removed, it is intended to last for some time at this location. It was always intended that we'd have, a piece of public art at the City Hall, and just now that we have a new building, we're relocating it to meet the intent. So this the faux gilding has been discussed. This is a UV and tamper resistant or graffiti resistant covering reproduction. Looking at the heritage attributes that we've identified in the designation bylaw, none of the heritage attributes of the building will be affected. and the prominence of the lions in that corner of Dalhousie and Queen Streets. And this will be drawing attention and making sure the public art sees a lot of view at the corner, at the intersection of two streets, but maintaining the original integrity of the front entrance. So next slide. Staff feel that this is an appropriate alteration and that application HA 0923 be approved.
Any questions for Patrick? Great, seeing none. Thank you both for your work on all of this. So we need a motion to approve. Dan and Tamara seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. I declare that carried unanimous. We're almost there, guys. We're almost at the end. This is the most marathon heritage committee meeting I think I've ever had. So we're on to item 4.8. So this was a report that was circulated. I think Patrick initially wrote the report, and it listed a whole bunch of research that, ooh, I feel like the committee did at some point in the past. I don't know who else, maybe the people sitting beside me here. They may have been on the committee, but not part of the research committee. So we looked at a whole bunch of candidates and produced bios for them. And you can see in the report, there's a list of A through Q people or former councillors of the city. And so we are supposed to recommend 4 candidates for approval for this year and the subsequent 3 years. So with that, if anyone reviewed anything and would like to nominate a candidate or a person for a specific year, now is your opportunity to speak and give your opinion about which one of these or which 4 of these proposed people we should recognize outside of City Hall. And it's right outside the room here on the left wall. As you're heading out of the room, there's a whole bunch of portraits from past members of council. Councillor Sullivan.
William Matthews.
Okay, you liked William Matthews?
Just one of the early mayors of the city. And at that time, I can only imagine how difficult it would have been to balance operating a city at that time and managing a family and everything else all at the same time.
There's some information that I have come across about William Matthews since we did this little introductory, I guess, maybe cursory research. He was also involved in some of the more, I guess, contentious trials in Brantford early on. So he's a person that both did good things for the city and probably also did some not as good things for the city. He was, I believe, a juror in the Over and Moore case, the only double hanging that we had here in Brantford. And there are some comments that I think he made there not too great about our local Six Nations people as well. But he is certainly someone who did serve on city council and did a number of things for the city during these early years as well. So he definitely could be a person that we include. Anyone else have a candidate that jumped out at them from the list of candidates? Bev?
I like John H. Matthews for his lengthy contribution to the expositor.
The other Matthews.
Yes.
Okay, so we have both of the Matthews folks. Anyone else that jumped out at people? Bowlby. What did you like about Bowlby? Anything in particular?
Just a long history of
Yeah,
That's a lifetime of servitude.
If we're going by dates, it's the third highest on the list.
There we go, yeah.
what do you mean, third oldest?
Third longest.
Oh,
Just
third
one,
longest
yeah.
serving. Yeah,
Oh, yeah, I guess Large, right? Thomas Large was probably number one, is he?
George F. Stern and William Whitaker at 16 years each, John Bowlby at 15, Thomas Large and Joseph H. Minshall also at 15.
yeah, yeah. Bowlby's a good person too. And then who's the other one that Hartman, Charles H. Hartman. I saw information on him. He had a blacksmith shop in Brantford early on, and we have some good photos of him as well. So he's another person that I think would be a good person to potentially include. Oh yeah, we had a lot of information about. And a lot of these guys were around the same time as well, because I remember seeing, I did one for a council picture. It must have been 1929, because George Stern was on it, as well as there was like 3 of the people on our list that were all in this one council photo from 1929. Any other people that stuck out to anyone as someone worthy of some recognition? No? Okay.
Maybe
Sorry?
Valentine, just for this child welfare,
Yeah.
sort of different than the rest of them were finance and industrial, whereas.
He did some social service
social
kind of
services,
stuff.
exactly.
Stuff for the kids, which is we always need. They're our future generation.
Right.
Did you mention Bragg?
And Bragg is
Walter
another
Bragg?
really good one.
The reason why I'm saying it is 36 years working for the city, including council.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he worked for the city as well, which is kind of interesting. Okay, so we have a number of names, but we can only pick 4 then. So of the names we discussed, now I'm getting. William Matthews. We have John Matthews. Bowlby. We talked about. Who else? I did Hartman. Bragg, and here was the other one? Valentine. So the good thing is, we can always recognize some of these people in the future as well, past 26 as well. So we have six people. Which 4 do we think are the best ones? Maybe between the 2 Matthews, Bowlby, Hartman, Bragg, and Valentine. And then we can pick what years they're going to be in.
I would think that in light of your more recent research into the first Matthews, that
Agreed.
would probably strike him off the list.
Yep.
Okay. So then that's William Matthews, not John H. Matthews.
Yep.
Because John H. Matthews was later, and there was a bunch of research on him and pictures.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna eliminate. So that's 1 down. Any ideas about who we should eliminate between Bowlby, Hartman, Bragg, and Valentine? I like the idea of Valentine because there is something social service related there.
That's the same with Bragg. Children's aid, housing, welfare.
Okay. So then should we pick one between Bragg and Valentine? Then maybe?
Yeah.
Any strong opinions one way or the other?
Why is there a 20-year gap in Valentine's service, like from 23 to 45? He wasn't there, like he was representative up until 23 and then not again till 45. Does anyone know what happened there?
There's a number of weird council positions that are like that. And I can think of a number of people who stepped forward who weren't on council, and they only stepped forward during certain time periods, like the war. And then there was another councillor and mayor that stepped forward during the Depression. And like that, it was always when social service stuff like was needed, when it was abundantly needed in the community. That's the time that they stepped forward. So it could be something very similar, where that's at the end of World War II. So perhaps he had just returned from the front or something like that. So often there are large gaps. Even think about it. Mayor Davis was on council when I was born in the early mid 80s, and he went away for a time, and now he's come back as our mayor, right? So there are things like that.
He's up there with his mustache.
Yes, exactly. I know, I've seen it. So do you have a preference between one, Bragg or Valentine? Okay, Bragg is 13 and Valentine is less. Do we want to go with Bragg or Valentine?
I like Bragg.
Okay, I like Walter Bragg too. He's a pretty good guy. Okay, so we got our names now. Now we got years. Who do we want to recognize in which year? Or do we want to do them in alphabetical order, just by last name on what year they fall, or do we want to pick specific people for specific years? Thoughts, ideas?
Alphabetical order.
Dan goes for alphabetical order.
So if it's alphabetical, it will be Walter J. Bragg in 23, John Wedgwood Bowlby in 24, Charles Hartman in 25, and John H. Matthews in 26.
And if I can throw an extra note in here, I think that works perfectly for Bragg because it's actually been 75 years this year from when he last served.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
That's
So throws
good.
A little quick little thing in.
I know sometimes it's like really great. You want to do that. You're like, yes, let's make these line up for anniversaries. And then one person doesn't fit another
Mess with the whole system.
But the alphabetical with this works out perfectly. So that's what we have as our drafted then with this discussion, basically based on our motion. So that the report be received, and then 2023 would be Walter Bragg, 20, right? Did I get that right?
23 will be Bragg, 24 will be Bowlby, 25 will be Hartman, and 26 will be Matthews.
Okay. So I need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Sullivan and Member Brown. Any discussion on our proposed slate of candidates there for the next 4 years? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. I declare that carried then. We're almost there. Consent items, so we have minutes that we need to approve from our last meeting. So any errors or omissions that people noted, misspelling of your name can sometimes happen. Seeing none, I'll call for a mover and a seconder for approval of the minutes. Moved by Councillor Sullivan, seconded by Tamara. Any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. I declare that carried. Prominence Point Subcommittee. We do not have any updates. We did not have a meeting I need to schedule a meeting. Resolutions, there's no resolution, no notices of motion. So our final item is adjournment. I need a mover. Dan Brown, thank you. Thanks everyone for a great meeting, and hopefully we did a record number of items in a relatively short period of time. Thanks, everyone.
Good night, everybody.